When Jade got released, she gained a lot of traction, for all the wrong reasons though. Holy did the Warframe player base have a field day with her release. But I'm not here to add to whatever that phase was. I just want to show you guys the power of Jade, because a surprising amount of players forgot she even exists. Jade is an amazing Warframe that I didn't pick up and really look at when she got released, because she didn't seem fun or meta, but my friends played her a fair amount, and she never really became something that stuck in their loadouts, so I made the mistake of never picking her up, which I do regret, because don't get me wrong, she's not an insane meta broken high KPM Warframe, but she is very fun to play. Before I do get into the video, if you guys want builds for any specific Warframes or even weapons, just leave it down in the comments below, because there's so much videos for me to make, but at the same time I don't want to be producing garbage that no one really needs and no one wants to watch, because it takes me a considerable amount of time to edit the videos. So if there's any Warframes that you want videos on or any aspects of the game, please let me know. Jade's passive allows her to have 2 aura slots, increasing her mod capacity by a large amount, meaning less former, making her easier to min-max, and it allows newer players who don't have much time to invest into a Warframe more leniency. Her second passive, yep, she has 2, is Judgment. Judgment is a debuff that is applied to enemies that gives enemies a 50% damage vulnerability. Any enemies killed with this debuff extends the time of Symphony of Mercy by 2 seconds. Her exalted weapon, which we will get into later, can detonate these judgments with her alternate fire for larger AoE damage effects. Jade's first ability, Light's Judgment, creates a well of light that heals allies over time and burns enemies who stand in it. The healing effect persists on allies even if they leave the area. Any enemies that are caught inside the well are weakened, taking more damage from all sources. The ability synergizes very well with her entire kit, because killing these weakened enemies extends the duration of her second ability, and her ultimate can detonate the debuffs for a larger area of effect explosions, the debuffs that are applied being judgments. Her second ability is Symphony of Mercy. Jade sings a powerful hymn, creating an aura that circles between 3 potential buffs for her allies. The first being Power of the 7, which increases the ability strength of all allies. The second being Deathbringer, which boosts all weapon damage of allies. And the third being Spirit of Resilience, which improves shield effectiveness by speeding up the recharge and restoring shields much quicker over time. The duration of this song is extended by killing enemies who have been marked by her other abilities, which is Light's Judgment and Glory of High. Now whenever I say marked enemies or debuffed enemies, what I'm referring to is Jade's passive, which is Judgment. Jade can freely cycle between the 3 buffs at any time, even if the ability is active, making this ability a no-brainer to have on at all times. It's also important to note that Jade briefly becomes invulnerable when she first begins to cast this ability. Her third ability is called Ophanim's Eye. Jade summons a group of orbiting sentries that project a cone of light in front of her. This gaze has 2 purposes. Firstly, it aggressively debuffs enemies by slowing them down and reducing their armor per second. The second purpose makes the gaze serve as a lifeline. It can remotely revive downed teammates from a distance by halting their bleeding timer and gradually filling their revival meter, making it an incredibly powerful ability during chaotic missions like Arcanes. Jade's last ability is Glory on High, which summons her exalted weapons. Jade takes flight, gaining powerful mobility and equipping her exalted energy weapons. While soaring, she fires explosive projectiles that can mark enemies with the damage vulnerability debuff, Judgment. Her alternate fire is a key feature. It detonates these marks on enemies, causing massive area of effect explosions. Now these explosions are nothing to sleep on, especially if you have Ophanim's Eye consistently armor stripping the entire room. These explosions are also significantly empowered if the marked enemy is standing inside of one of her Light's Judgment wells. When Jade casts her last ability, she enters a flight form, which consumes energy over time and prevents her from performing ground-based interactions like picking up keys or reviving allies. However, she can use all other abilities like Ophanim's Eye to remotely revive teammates, which allows it to remain safely in the air while reviving allies while dealing a considerable amount of damage, alongside regenerating shields for her entire team, alongside healing all allies that enter her well. Yeah, you can already see why this warframe is pretty fun to play. It's also worth mentioning that you cannot switch to your other weapons while you're in this flight form. When you are in the flight form, you are only stuck to her exalted weapons. Now, if that all sounds complicated, I will dumb it down for you here, because Jade is really easy to play. Make sure your Optimum Eye is active at all times, which is your third ability, to make sure that you're consistently slowing down enemies and reducing their armor, making not only your survivability better, but also your damage output much better. Make sure Symphony of Mercy is also active all the time. You can switch between power strength, weapon damage, and shield regen. Now, I'll be honest, I'm very lazy, so I never really use the power strength buff. I only alternate between the shield recharge and the weapon damage buff, because I just don't care to give myself an extra 30% power strength when casting abilities. For ultimate, you just cast it while making sure your second and third ability are active. You fly around, you spam enemies with attacks, and that's really it. You can use the first ability to put Wells of Judgment down when there is a large group of enemies in one area, but it's not really necessary since the damage vulnerability debuff Judgment can be applied from your ultimate fire anyway. So you don't really need the well, which is why I usually change this out for any other Subsume ability. Even though it is in itself an amazing ability to have, I'm just lazy. So for the build, you don't really need to have too much on here, so I won't make an intermediate and end game level build because the gap between the two is very small. Most mods in this build, if not all of them, you can get very easily, except obviously the primed ones, but you can always replace the primed ones for their normal counterparts, so that shouldn't be an issue. Even in terms of the arcanes aren't very hard to get. We just had the Jade Shadow events that came around and that gave you guys pretty much every arcane in the game, so this build is very easy. For our two aura mod slots, we use Aerodynamic and Growing Power. Aerodynamic is an amazing mod for Jade because it gives you a flat 24% damage reduction. This multiplies with every other damage reduction you have in your kit. Your base damage reduction you get from your shield, which is 50%. If you use Aviator like me for your Exodus slot, you get an additional 40% damage reduction while airborne, which all multiply together and give you a pretty hefty amount of damage reduction on your shield. For our second aura mod slot, we use Growing Power. Growing Power is just nice to have. The more power strength you have on Jade, the more damage she will do. And because we have a high range pool for our build, having Growing Power to get us to that 300% mark is great. We use 3 corrupted mods. We use Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude, and Overextended. Power strength is important on Jade, but range is also a very important stat that not a lot of people take into consideration. Everything in your kit is affected by range except Symphony of Mercy. Symphony of Mercy uses affinity range, whereas everything else uses the range that you have on your warframe. The radius of your glory hits is increased by the amount of range you have, meaning every shot you do will hit multiple enemies. The more enemies you hit at one time, the more damage you will do, and the more chances you will have on applying judgments. We use Stretch to take our ability range all the way up to 235%. Prime Flow and Prime Continuity are added for duration as well as an increase in our maximum energy. Constitution, this mod is a flex slot. You can replace this with whatever you want. If you want to use an augment, you can. If you want to add a bit more power strength, you can do that as well. But for me, I like having that extra bit of duration because I just feel like it helps with all of my abilities. Again, you don't have to have that on. And for our last mod, we use Equilibrium. Now, Equilibrium paired with Nourish is the only thing you will need to sustain your energy. But Equilibrium now is probably the strongest mod in the game because you can now pick up health orbs even if your health is full and convert them all into energy, which will keep your energy topped up pretty much all the time. For our 2 arcanes, we use Molt Augmented for a 60% increase in power strength. This paired with Growing Power gives you an additional 85% power strength, which does indeed take your overall strength above 300%. Arcane Aegis is nothing to sleep on with Jade because Jade has a very good synergy with her Symphony of Mercy buff where she increases shield regen by 22%. This paired with Arcane Aegis makes Jade quite literally unkillable. You can stand in a group of enemies, and as long as Arcane Aegis is active and you have the Spirit of Resilience buff, you are unkillable. The glory build for Jade is unfortunately a non-negotiable. You kind of need every single mod in here. You don't have to have the primed versions. You can replace the primed versions for their regular counterparts, but you need every mod in here, and I'll explain why. For our statuses, we've opted for heat, corrosive, and magnetic. Corrosive is amazing against armored enemies, and magnetic is amazing against shielded and overguarded enemies. I'll be honest, everything is very easy to kill on Jade except Eximus units. Sometimes Eximus units can be a real pain in the butt, and having magnetic might just helps us that little tiny bit to one or two shot most overguarded enemies. Prime target cracker gives us critical damage. Along with the magnetic might 40% critical damage you have an additional 150% crit damage. We use galvanized diffusion for our multi-shot, and lethal torrent, which gives us multi-shot and again very much needed fire rate. For our arcane, this is a non-negotiable. We need secondary innovate. The reason is because our crit chance is 15%, and I'll be honest, that is ridiculously low. Having a 15% crit chance on anything makes it pretty much unmoddable, because most crit mods will only give you up to 200% crit chance, which will only take your crit chance up to 45%. So having secondary innovate to consistently hit orange and red crits can be very, very, very useful. Primed Convolution and Pistol Pestilence will be our two mods to make corrosive. If you don't have the prime versions, again, you can just swap them out for their regular counterparts. Now, an important thing to note is that arcanes on Jade are very diverse. You can have multiple different arcanes. You don't have to have the ones that I'm using currently. Molt Augmented, I would recommend for you to get your power strength up to 300%, because power strength buffs quite literally everything in her kit, even her exalted weapon. However, Arcane Precision is another very good option you can use, which increases your secondary weapon damage by 300% on a headshot. Arcane Energize, if you're having any energy issues, you can use Arcane Energize as well, but honestly, if you are having energy issues, in my opinion, it's less to do with the build and more to do with you just not picking up health and energy orbs off the ground because you're too high up in the sky. Molt Efficiency is another great arcane you can use for an additional 35% ability duration. Now, it's not needed, but if you do want that extra bit of duration, you can use that. But out of those arcanes, you can pretty much choose anything you want. Arcane Avenger is also another great option if you want to have a flat 45% crit chance boost, but again, because we're using secondary innovate, we don't need any other crit chance. We should just rely on that specific arcane itself. And lastly, Arcane Guardian. Not an amazing option, but if you want that extra layer of survivability, this will take your armor all the way up to 1000, which will give you very high damage reduction on your health pool. I saw some people putting Arcane Barrier on Jade. Honestly, Arcane Aegis is just miles better. So it's probably going to be better just to use Arcane Aegis over Arcane Barrier. For Archon shards, very simple. You want to have a couple ability strength shards on her, preferably 2 Tower Forged ones. You want to have 1 casting speed shard on her because her ability cast times can be a bit slow. And the other 2 are completely optional. You can add shield capacity, Archon shards. You can add increased ability damage to enemies affected by corrosive if you're going to use my build. I wouldn't recommend you adding secondary critical chance because again, we have secondary innovate, we don't need it. You can put 1 Tau Forged effectiveness on energy orbs shard on to help with the energy economy. There's a lot you can do, but the only recommendation I would give you is to go with 2 Tau Forged ability strength shards and 1 casting speed, and everything else you can pick and choose however you want. So for subsume abilities, the reason I left this at the end of the video is because you don't really need any subsumes on Jade. Jade's kit is already very powerful and you don't need a subsume ability, but subsume abilities do add some layer of comfortability or convenience to her kit. They don't necessarily make her more powerful, but they do add a nice conveniency to the frame. Jade's 1 is a weird gimmick because when you place her down on the floor, the ability will not move, meaning if you change rooms, that ability will stay there and quite literally do nothing. And if you have low efficiency, like I do on my build, like pretty much everyone else will do, regardless of what build you have, throwing away 40 energy to put down a well to kill maybe 3 enemies, it's not really that great. Now, if you want to keep that ability on and you like the way you use it, that's completely fine. But if you don't, the best subsume options you have are Zarta's Whisper, Nourish, and Roar. Now, these 3 abilities will directly buff the damage of your exalted weapons based on what statuses you're using. Zata is great for blast, Roar is great for anything to do with heat, and if you want to go for Nourish, Nourish is pretty much good for any weapon in the game because it applies Varl onto enemies and allows you to not have to build Varl on your weapons. And honestly, I would argue that Nourish Blast is much stronger than Zata Blast, but that's just my personal opinion. Other than that, you don't really have too many Subsume options. You can use things like Null Star for increased damage reduction, but you can't recast it without the augment, which takes away a mod slot for Jade, which is not great. Pillage is not good again because our Symphony buff gives us a shield regen buff, and pair that with Arcane Aegis, you will probably be on max shield all the time. You can use Amori, which I believe is Colmay's Subsume ability. That will give you a bit more damage mitigation, which again, you don't really need. But if you want that extra layer of survivability, you can use that ability as well. Other than that, I'm sure there are other Subsume abilities, but they're not really all that great. And Nourish is probably the best Subsume ability on her. Yes, I know, the most overused ability in the game, but it is what it is. If you guys did enjoy the video, please leave a like, please comment on what I should do next. If you want anything specific, I can do that. Somebody asked me for lore videos, not yet. I don't think my editing expertise are that good, nor do I have the time to make a video like that. I can try, but it wouldn't be great, so I'm going to hold off on it for now. Anyway, I hope you guys are having a wonderful week, and peace out. And take care.
Chat asked if warframes get pregnant, asking for a friend.